One of the earliest and most chilling reported encounters with mysterious visitors dressed in black occurred back in 1953. It involved Albert K. Bender, an author and UFO investigator from Pennsylvania who had, 1 year earlier, founded the International Flying Saucer Bureau, the first major civilian UFO organization in the world. It wasn't long after he had founded the Bureau, however, that strange things had started to happen. Bender began to experience bouts of inexplicable ill health and was plagued by strange phone calls as well as the feeling of being watched. In one instance, he noticed a strange man with glowing eyes observing him at a local movie theater, who then seemed to follow him as he walked home. He started to experience strange telepathic episodes, as though someone or something was trying to get inside his head. He also complained of a bitter and inexplicable smell of burning sulfur in his attic. But it was in July of 1953 that things would come to a head. On this particular occasion, 3 men visited his home. All of them were dressed in black clothes and hats, and they demanded, through telepathic communication, that he immediately cease all of his work researching and investigating the UFO phenomenon. They confiscated copies of the Bureau's official magazine as they departed, and left behind the same terrible smell that had been coming from his attic. The visit reportedly left Bender so absolutely terrified that he was unable to eat for several days. Convinced that these men had been otherworldly visitors, he quickly decided to shut down the International Flying Saucer Bureau a mere 1.5 years after setting it up. In the final issue of his quarterly magazine Space Review, he wrote, "The mystery of the flying saucers is no longer a mystery. The source is already known, but any information about this is being withheld by orders from a higher source. We would like to print the full story in Space Review, but because of the nature of the information, we have been advised in the negative. We advise those engaged in saucer work to be very cautious." While Bender did later write about his experiences, he ultimately abandoned the subject entirely and moved to California, having never learned the truth behind his mysterious visitors. He died in March 2016 at the age of 94. Back in 1967, a man named Robert Richardson, who was from Toledo in Ohio, contacted the Aerial Phenomena Research Organization to talk about a strange encounter. In July of that year, he had been driving during the night when, upon rounding a bend, his vehicle ran into a peculiar object that had been hovering in the middle of the road. Fortunately, the impact didn't do much damage to his car, but the mysterious object itself had seemingly vanished into thin air, never to be seen again. While at the time the only sign that anything had happened was a set of tire marks on the tarmac, upon returning to the scene later, Richardson discovered a small piece of metal on the ground that he believed could have been from the object that he had collided with. He decided to take the metal home and then send it to the organization for analysis. 3 days later, however, he received a visit at his home late in the evening from 2 strange men. They asked him about the incident and stayed for around 10 minutes. Richardson noted that the men hadn't introduced themselves and had offered very little in the way of an explanation for their visit. He watched with unease as they drove off in a black Cadillac. Then, around a week after that, he received a visit from a second pair of mysterious men dressed in black suits. One of the men seemed to have an unknown foreign accent, while the other spoke perfect English. At first, the men tried to gaslight him into believing that he hadn't hit anything at all on the road earlier that year. But when that didn't work, they began demanding that he hand over the piece of metal that he had found on the road. When he told them that he had sent it away to be analysed, the 2 men started threatening both he and his wife and insisted that he get the metal back. They eventually left, leaving Richardson shaken and desperate for answers. What made the visit particularly strange was the fact that nobody else should have known that he had even found the piece of metal in the first place, as he had only disclosed it to his wife and to the 2 investigators to whom he had sent the object for analysis. Who were these mysterious men in black? How did they know about all this? And why did they care? The results of the analysis itself later came back suggesting that the object he had found was not of extraterrestrial origin. But if that was the case, why was he being threatened to hand it over? Fortunately for both he and his wife, Richardson never encountered the Men in Black again. There are few actors with as deep a connection to the unexplained and the mysterious as Dan Aykroyd, the man who, alongside Harold Ramis, wrote and starred in the iconic 1980s supernatural horror movie Ghostbusters, and who has presented numerous shows covering the UFO phenomenon, the paranormal, and various other related topics over the last 50 years. But it was an experience that Aykroyd had back in the early 2000s that has perhaps stuck with him the most, an encounter with potentially otherworldly beings that not only affected him, but also the television show that he had been working on at the time. The Sci-Fi Channel show, which was entitled Out There, was pretty much what you'd expect, an investigative deep dive series focusing on UFOs, alien abductions, and government conspiracies. It was set to feature interviews with prominent individuals in the UFO scene, such as researcher Dr. Stephen Greer and conspiracy theorist Stephen Bassett, as well as former military and intelligence community personnel with knowledge of UFOs and government cover-ups. Production of the show had been well underway, with dozens of interviews filmed and, according to Aykroyd, as many as 26 episodes completed by the end of 2002. One day during filming, however, something happened that would change the fate of the show forever. It had been any ordinary day, and Aykroyd had stepped out of the studio for a moment to smoke a cigarette. His mobile rang, and when he answered it, he recalled that it had been singer Britney Spears who had been calling him up to ask about an appearance on Saturday Night Live. He had been chatting on the phone and had glanced up briefly when something very odd caught his attention. A black sedan had suddenly pulled up nearby, having seemingly appeared out of nowhere. Two men got out, each dressed in black suits and sunglasses. They seemed strangely emotionless and just stood there staring at him without moving or saying a word. He later stated that they were not acting like human beings. The weirdest thing about the encounter, however, was what happened next. Aykroyd had turned around for a brief moment so that his back was turned, but then, when he turned back to face the two men a split second later, they had completely disappeared, as had their car. There was no sign of them anywhere. They had seemingly vanished into thin air. To this day, Aykroyd has maintained that the incident happened exactly as he described it. Following the encounter, things got even weirder. Within 2 hours of his sighting of the mysterious visitors, the entire show was completely cancelled. The network had pulled the plug. All the completed interviews and footage were scrapped, and all the episodes were sent to the studio's vault, where they continue to remain to this day, having never been released to the public. Even today, Aykroyd remains absolutely convinced that the show had been cancelled because it had strayed too close to something that the public was never meant to know about. No explanation for the mysterious men in black that he had seen outside was ever found, and he never found out who they were, where they had come from, or where they went. As of 2025, the show's episodes have still never been released.